Okay, hi guys. Welcome back to our study of the animal kingdom. Today we're going to continue our discussion of invertebrates. If you remember from the last video, an invertebrate is an animal without a backbone, and we looked at the first two phylums of invertebrates, okay, which was Porifera, which is the sponges. Very simplistic animals. They have cells, layers, but those cells do not form tissues. Okay, the other phylum of invertebrates that we had looked at was phylum Cnidaria, and phylum Cnidaria is a little bit more complicated than sponges, but then Porifera, but they are still very simplistic animals. They do have cell layers that do form into tissues. The organisms that you find in phylum Cnidaria are your corals, your sea anemones, your hydras, and your jellyfishes. Today, we're going to continue our discussion of invertebrates, and we're going to be talking about worms. Okay, and some of you might be thinking, worms, Mrs. Young, or how are worms animals? But if you remember from the first animal kingdom video that we did, we said that in order to be an animal, basically what it means is you're a multicellular organism that have eukaryotic cells with no cell walls. So therefore, worms are a type of animal in the animal kingdom. However, before we can talk about the worms, there's a few things I need to clarify for you because you're going to see these terms as we go through the three phylums of worms that we have. All right, and that is the concept of a coelom. All right, coelom was one of your vocabulary words for the animal kingdom that you did for me. And a coelom is defined as a fluid-filled body cavity. Okay, specifically, it's a fluid-filled body cavity that has internal organs inside of it, okay? It serves as a protective cushion for internal organs or as a type of skeleton for shape for some of these lower level animals, okay? Now, you're going to see terms such as acoelomate. All right, several animals are acoelomates, which means they do not have this body cavity. All right, you're also going to see terms such as several animals are pseudocoelomates, which means they have a partial body cavity. All right, but a lot of the animals that we're going to be talking about are coelomates, which means they do have this body cavity, this fluid-filled body cavity that serves as a cushion as well as a type of a skeleton. Not a skeleton as you and I have a skeleton, but it does provide shape for these organisms. All right, now here's a diagram that shows you what a coelomate looks like, what a pseudocoelomate looks like, and what an acoelomate looks like. Okay, on the top of this diagram, you can see a coelom, and you can see that that's an earthworm. All right, and so that phylum of worms, of that organisms, they have a coelom. Okay, and you can see that the coelom is that fluid-filled body cavity that surrounds the digestive tract. You can see the digestive tract is suspended there inside the body of the organism, but it is attached to the tissue layer, okay? So that is what a coelom looks like. All right, in the middle picture there, you see a pseudocoelom, and that also is a phylum of worms called roundworms, all right? They have what are called pseudocoeloms. They have the digestive tract, and there's a muscle layer, but the digestive tract is not attached to the muscle layer. All right, so there is this fluid-filled cavity. It's a partial cavity, but because the digestive tract is not attached to the muscle layer inside, it said that they have a pseudocoelom. All right, and then on the bottom you see an acoelomate. And acoelomates, an example we're going to be talking about today are the flatworms, all right? And you can see there is no body cavity, all right? They're flat, all right? So you can see there's the digestive tract in there and the tissue region, but there's no opening for this fluid-filled body cavity. Okay, so with that, let's start talking about the wonderful world of worms. All right, now, we talked, as I said before, we talked about the first two phylums of invertebrates, and that was phylum Porifera and phylum Cnidaria. Now, there's actually three phylums of worms, all right, that are in the animal kingdom. And so when you see numbers 3, 4, and 5, it's that this is the third, fourth, and fifth phylum inside the animal kingdom that we're looking at. Okay, and the first one is Platyhelminthes, and Platyhelminthes is a word that means flatworms, and an easy way to remember that is plat, flat. Okay? Examples of these types of worms are planaria, tapeworms, and flukes. Now, planaria might not be one that you're familiar with. Tapeworms might be something you may have heard of before. Fluke, possibly you may have heard of before, but these are flatworms. All right, and what can we talk about as far as flatworms are concerned? Well, there's approximately 20,000 species of flatworms in the world. Okay, these do possess bilateral symmetry. All right, if you remember, sponges, the porifera, they have no symmetry, so they're asymmetrical. Cnidaria has radial symmetry. All right, so this is the first group of animals to show this bilateral symmetry. And bilateral symmetry is when you take, you can cut the body from head to toe, basically, or from top to bottom, all right, or from front to back. You can slice it vertically, all right, and you have a mirror image on both sides. All right, the 20,000 species of Platyhelminthes are both aquatic and terrestrial, which means you can find them in water as well as you can find them on land. All right, the aquatic species primarily are the planaria, and the terrestrial species primarily are tapeworms and flukes. However, they live on land, but they actually live inside of other organisms, and we'll talk about that a little bit. These are mostly parasitic, okay? Again, if you've heard of tapeworms and flukes, all right, these are parasitic worms that live inside other organisms, and they cause harm to these organisms. All right, if you have pets, cats and dogs, and they go outside on a regular basis, you have to take them to the vet on a regular basis, and that's one of the things that they check for is the presence of these parasitic flatworms, such as tapeworms and flukes. All right, tapeworms are a type of a worm that literally latches on to the intestinal lining of the animal in which they're growing in, and they grow in length by segments. All right, and you're going to see a picture of a tapeworm in just a little bit, but they grow in length by segments, and they actually will continue to grow until they fill the entire intestinal tract of the animal in which they're living in. And dogs and cats and humans who pick up tapeworms actually lose weight uncontrollably while they are doing nothing but eating. And that's because the tapeworms, they grow inside the intestinal tract of these animals. And if you remember anything about the intestines, that is where the absorption of the food happens. So when an animal eats, it gets the digestion process begins in the stomach. However, the absorption of all the minerals and nutrients from the food takes place in the intestines, especially the small intestines. And so when these tapeworms are growing inside these animals, they're actually absorbing the nutrients and the minerals. And so the animal is losing weight uncontrollably, but nonstop eating. All right. At one time, there were diet pills that were sold for people that contained tapeworm eggs. People would give themselves tapeworms on purpose. However, that's not the common anymore, and that didn't last for very long because that can be very dangerous. All right. Now, excuse me, flatworms reproduce both sexually and asexually. Asexually, they can reproduce through a process called regeneration, and that means that if you cut the worm in half, or if you break off segments, say, of a tapeworm, all right, they will grow back the pieces that they're missing. So you can take this little planaria worm, you can cut the worm in half, and each half will grow back the part that it's missing. And so you'll end up having two worms. All right, so that's a form of asexual reproduction for these organisms. They also reproduce sexually in that they are hermaphrodites. And what that means is that they possess both male and female reproductive organs or gonads. Now, just because they contain both male and female reproductive organs does not mean that they reproduce within themselves. Okay, they do usually find a mate and they exchange sperm and egg, all right, with those mates, even though they possess both. All right, now here's some pictures of those flatworms that I was talking about. All right, that one that I just put up there in the upper right hand corner, that's a planaria. I love planarias because they're so cute and they're not really parasitic. But if you look at them, it looks like they have eyes and that they're looking at you. And those are actually light sensitive eye spots is what those are. Lots of nerve endings in those spots, but it does look like they're looking at you. These guys are very tiny and they live in water. You can see them best with a microscope. However, you don't necessarily have to have a microscope to be able to see them. But in order to see details, a microscope is what is used. And it's a shame that we're not in school, because I have prepared slides of planaria that we would be looking at to take a look at the details of these particular worms. This picture here is that of a fluke. Okay, very common flukes are liver flukes. And so they literally are worms that are parasitic that burrow and live inside the liver of the animals that they are growing in. And then there is a picture of a tapeworm, okay? And as I explained to you, tapeworms are these long segmented worms that grow in length by adding segments onto them. And you can see that they can get pretty long, all right? Now, I did put up a link to a YouTube video for that it talks to you about these tapeworms and these flukes. So please make sure you watch that. It gives you a lot of neat information. But the planaria, as I said, they're aquatic, so you find those mostly in water, in ponds and in lakes, in streams and things like that. But the flukes and the tapeworms are terrestrial, and they are parasitic worms that grow inside other animals and cause harm to those animals. Their eggs often can be found in the soil. All right, so if you walk around outside barefoot and you have cuts and openings in your feet, it's possible that you can pick up eggs of these organisms. It's kind of funny. I don't walk around barefoot outside, and I always tell my friends and my family, because they laugh at me, that I know too much of what's in the soil. Now, of course, they're not always going to be around, all right, but it's entirely possible that if, you say there's a dog running around your neighborhood and they possibly have a tapeworm or they have a fluke and they defecate, those eggs can be found in their poop. And so if you are walking around close to where that is, it is entirely possible you could pick up these eggs just by openings in your feet. Cuts and bruises and things like that. All right. Some other pieces of information about flatworms is that they have what are called a two-way digestive tract. All right, now what does that mean? That means that there's only one opening. So you can almost kind of think of it as like a U-turn. I know you guys are all driving now. So if you can think of it as like a U-turn, food goes in the mouth, all right, and goes in, it gets digested, and then waste comes back out through that same opening. All right, so it's not foods coming in and waste is going out usually at the same time. That does happen at different times generally. All right, but it is a one opening. Food goes in, digested, waste goes back out the same opening. All right, these organisms are acoelomates. They're flat. They do not have a fluid-filled body cavity. They do have a definite head end. So these were the first animals to go through that cephalization process that we talked about back in the very first video, okay? Which it is a benefit for them because it allows for mobility, all right? There's a lot of sense organs, all right, that can test for food, can test for danger, as well as test for mates, all right? And tapeworms also have these circular hooks along the head in which to attach to the intestinal lining, all right, of the animal that they're growing in at this head end, all right? And these also were one of the first groups of animals to have organs. So not only, so we had the porifera that had just the cell layers, we had the cnidarians that their cell layers did form tissues, okay, and now we have the first group of animals that actually produced organs. So their tissues function together to form organs, all right? And here is a picture of the head end of a couple of different species of tapeworms. And so you can see, especially in the picture on the right there, those little hook-like structures that tapeworms use in which to attach to the intestinal lining. All right? So please make sure you watch those videos on the worms that I've put up for you because it'll give you a lot of neat information about how animals get these things and what they can do to the animals that they're growing in. All right, here's a picture, and again, it's my favorite. It's the planaria, just because they're so darn cute. But here you can see like internal structure of a flatworm. This is just an example of what the internal structure looks like. All right, you can see they are flat, henceforth the name flatworms. All right, but you can see like the mouth on this case, in this worm, is on the underside of the body, but that's also going to be the anus, in that food goes in, all right, gets digested, okay. You can see the gastrovascular cavity, that would be like a digestive tract, all right, and then waste comes back out through the same opening. You can see all the nerve cords, all right, the nerve tissue clusters up by the eye spots, all right. So they do actually have detailed like organ type structures inside of them, all right. And then there also, it shows you the bilateral symmetry that the flatworms exhibit. And where I said if you cut a planaria in half, all right, such as you see with that bilateral symmetry picture, all right, if you would cut a planaria straight down the middle like that, both halves would grow back the half that they're missing. All right, and so you would end up with two worms. And again, that's a form of asexual reproduction for these organisms. All right. Now, the second phylum of worms is phylum Nematoda. And Nematoda are roundworms. All right. Now, there's not a whole lot as far as these guys are concerned, but here's the neat thing about them, or examples of a nematoda is hookworms, ringworms, excuse me, and then those dog heartworms. All right. If you have dogs, all right, you know you have to treat them regularly with heartworm medication. And that's because, again, these are worms that are easily picked up in the environment. Okay, these are also ones where the eggs can be found in the soil. And so a dog can very easily pick them up just walking around in their environment. All right, they're very abundant. Okay, there's a lot of different species of roundworms out there. All right. These guys have a pseudocoelom. All right. The flatworms are acoelomates, and then the roundworms are the pseudocoelom. All right, where they have a partially fluid-filled body cavity. All right. These guys have a one-way digestive tract, whereas the flatworms had a two-way digestive tract, which meant like the food went in, did a U-turn, and the waste came back out the same opening. Roundworms have a one-way digestive tract, and that's where they have two definite openings, a mouth and an anus. So the food goes in the mouth, and then the waste products come out the anus, all right? So a one-way digestive tract means two openings. There's no U-turn being done there inside these bodies. All right, these worms will reproduce sexually, and they do have separate sexes, whereas flatworms were hermaphrodites in that they all contained both male and female gonads, or reproductive structures. These guys do not, okay? They do have separate sexes, and they actually reproduce through internal fertilization, which means the male worms will actually deposit the sperm inside the female. That's what internal fertilization means. And then the female lays thousands and thousands and thousands of eggs at one time. And many of these are parasitic, okay? Most of them actually are parasitic. And here I have some pictures for you of some of these different worms, all right? The picture on the left is pictures of like the heartworm that you find in dogs. On the right there are examples of hookworms, and these worms as well, just like tapeworms, will attach themselves to the inside, the intestinal lining of the animal in which they are growing in. And again, they cause harm. They're not good to have. But again, pets can pick these up very easily from the environment in which they live. And you can see that they too have teeth kind of like structures that they use in which to attach to the intestinal lining of the animal that they're growing in. All right, again, I gave you links to wonderful, wonderful videos on YouTube that explain the roundworms and the flatworms. So please make sure you watch those in addition to watching this. All right. Now, lastly, the last phylum of worms that we have is phylum Annelida, and Annelida is the segmented worms, okay? And probably the most common or most well-known type of segmented worm is the earthworm that you see on the top right-hand corner there of that slide. All right, in the middle you see an example of a marine worm, which is a worm that lives in water. All right, very similar to an earthworm, except it lives in the water. And then the one on the bottom there is a picture of a leech. All right, and a leech is also a segmented worm, okay? Leeches, I don't know if you're familiar with a leech, but a leech is a type of worm that will suck blood from an animal, all right? Now, they don't necessarily cause harm, all right? You find them a lot of times in like standing water, in ponds, and lakes that don't have any currents, all right? And way back when, many moons ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, leeches were actually used in for medicine, for medicinal purposes, where if somebody was sick, a lot of times they would go to the doctor, and in order to remove the infection from the person, they believed that attaching leeches to the person and allowing the leeches to suck out the blood would suck out the infection. It doesn't harm the person. All right, so when leeches attach to a person or another animal, you don't necessarily know that it's there. They just attach on, and they have like little fang type of structures that they use to penetrate the skin, but at the same time they release like this antiseptic that numbs the skin, so you don't even know that they're there. And they're not harmful. They're not going to just continue to suck blood until they can't suck blood anymore, or suck it all out of you. They will fill up, and then once they're filled, they let go. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at some things here. First of all, earthworms were the first segmented animals to evolve. Okay? And they have complete organs and organ systems. Believe it or not, for something so small and something so simplistic, they actually do have complete organ systems like we have. All right, their bodies are segmented like necklace beads, and hence the name segmented worms. All right, and you can see that by looking at the pictures of them there on the right-hand side. All right, the segments or groups of segments can actually operate independently, allowing for specialization of function. All right, the bands, like a lot of times if you've ever picked up an earthworm or have seen some of those really large earthworms, they have like a little band around their body. That actually is a very important structure in that's where like the sex organs are located and things like that. So segments or groups of segments can operate independently, allowing for specialization of function with these organisms. Okay, their body plan is that of a tube within a tube. Okay, well, what does that mean? That means that they have a gut tube, which is the inner tube, okay? And a lot of times if you think of a gut, you think of like your stomach, your digestive system. And they too have a one-way digestive tract, which means food goes in one end, waste comes out the other end. They have a definite mouth and a definite anus. But then the gut tube is suspended inside a coelom. So this is the first phylum of organisms that we're looking at that actually have a coelom. They are definite coelomates. All right. Now there you can see in that diagram some of the internal organs of an earthworm. All right, you can see that they have, intestines, they have a nerve cord. All right, you can see that they have a circulatory system, those pumping vessels. All right, they do have like 7 hearts or heart-like structures. All right, and there you can see in that one diagram that band that I was talking about. All right. Now, since earthworms are the most common or most well-known type of segmented worm, all right, we're going to focus a little bit mostly on what they have, okay? But just keep in mind that marine worms as well as leeches, very, 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 very similar. This is why they are all classified together in Annelida. But when we're talking about earthworms, they feed by sucking in soil and decaying matter, and then they digest the organic compounds and excrete the wastes, okay? Just like we do, all right? We don't suck in soil and decaying matter, but we eat food, we digest the organic compounds, and then we excrete our wastes, all right? Their digestive tract is actually pretty complicated, all right? And they have 3 special organs to their digestive tract. And the first one is a pharynx. And the pharynx is what sucks the soil in and forces it down the esophagus. So they do actually have an esophagus structure. So you can see the mouth in that diagram there on the right-hand side. All right, and the pharynx is what forces it down the esophagus. All right, they also have a crop, which is like a storage organ where it stores soil for digestion. But then they have a gizzard, which the gizzard you can kind of liken to our stomach, in that it's a very strong organ that chops and grinds the soil. If you've ever eaten a large meal, and after the meal is over and you sit down and you're relaxing and you can hear the noises and kind of feel your stomach churning, that's what they do. It chops and it grinds the food that's in your stomach. The gizzard does the same thing for these worms. All right. Now, earthworms are also, or excuse me, segmented worms are also hermaphrodites. Some of them are, which means that they possess both male and female sex organs, okay, in them, but some species of them do have separate sexes. Either way, they do reproduce sexually through external fertilization, which means that the sperm and the eggs are fertilized outside of the female's body. So, like, the female lays the eggs, and the male will excrete the sperm to fertilize those eggs, all right, and then the eggs hatch and new worms come about. All right. Now, where I had said that you can see that they have things called pumping vessels and they have like 7 heart-like structures, okay, they do have what is called a closed circulatory system. And a closed circulatory system means that blood is pumped through the body through a network of vessels. All right. We have a closed circulatory system as humans. We have a heart that pumps the blood through our body through a network of veins and arteries and capillaries. Well, segmented worms also have a closed circulatory system in that the blood is confined inside this large network of vessels. All right? Okay, so that is it for our discussion of worms. In our next video, we're going to talk about the next phylum of invertebrates. But until then, have a great day.